Today I will present you the movie recap of The Martian, based on the novel of the same name. The film tells the story of Mark Watney, an astronaut who is left behind on Mars after a fierce storm forces Mark's crew to abort their mission. NASA and his crewmates devise a daring plan to bring Mark back to Earth with his crew. In the beginning, a team of 4 astronauts collect rock samples from Mars outside of their ship. Including them is a man, Mark Watney. Their colleagues warn them of an incoming sandstorm and are advised to come back inside the ship. While getting ready to take off, some debris thrown around by the storm damage the ship and they attempt to repair it. As they struggle to solve the problem and make it back inside, Mark is hit by some debris and sent flying away from the rest. The debris damages his communication systems and the rest of the team isn't able to get a hold of him. The storm gets progressively worse and the crew inside warns that the ship won't be able to withstand the wind much longer, so they need to leave soon. The commander sends her crew back inside but stays behind to try to look for Mark. She does her best, but due to the situation of their ship, she is forced to come back and proceed to leave to save the others. The crew mourns the loss of their friend as they depart from Mars. However, on the other side, NASA's director Sanders is holding a press conference informing the media of aborting their mission on Mars due to the heavy dust storm. Also, the team is coming back safely excluding Mark, who is struck dead. Meanwhile, Mark is seen waking up on Mars. He is half buried in the sand, having his suit beeping all kinds of damage errors. He stands up and finds that he's been impaled by some debris. He cuts the excess off but leaves the metal rod in so that he can keep the air pressure stable inside his suit. Mark walks his way back to the base and comes inside. Performing surgery on his own, Mark removes the debris from his abdomen and staples his wound. Mark turns on a video log and starts explaining what has happened to him for the record, also that the debris turned off his communication systems, but also kept his suit sealed. He realizes it will be at least 4 years before NASA will be able to get another manned mission to Mars and that he will run out of food long before then. He goes through the stores of the base and makes a detailed log of how much food he has left. He realizes he only has enough food to last him a year, and that he'll need to find a way to grow 3 more years worth of food. Luckily, Mark is a botanist, and he takes some potatoes the crew had brought with them. Mark gets to work cleaning off the solar panels, bringing loads of dirt inside and spreading it around. He tills the dirt inside, uses the crew's waste to fertilize his core, and plants the potatoes. However, Mark realizes that he does not have enough water to water all the crops, so he tries to figure out a way to make more water. He rigs up a machine that creates water through small chemical fires. However, on his first try almost blew himself up to death, yet he survived. Mark gives it another try and successfully manages the burner. After a few days, the inside walls of the garden are covered in condensation and the plants begin to sprout. However, back on Earth, NASA honors Mark and has a funeral for him. Director Vincent talks to the director about returning to Mars and collecting the equipment Mark's crew abandoned, but Sanders denies, saying that everything they do is supposed to be put on television and he doesn't want the public seeing Mark's body, that they have to wait. Vincent points out that Mark's body will never decompose on Mars, and that they could frame the mission to look like they were going back to Mars to recover Mark's body for his family. Mindy, a satellite supervisor, receives coordinates directing to Mark's location on Mars. Looking at the map, she notices the movement at the base. She quickly places an emergency call to the director notifying him about Mark. Considering calling the directors, they see the footage of the Mars base. However, they're facing numerous challenges. Handling the public after Mark's statement and his funeral is one of them. However, they have to show the footage, which is limited under a time of 24 hours. They're also worried because NASA will receive flack for abandoning their astronauts. Afterward, Sanders holds a press conference, telling the public about witnessing Mark's activity on Mars. On the other side, Mark studies the map at the base and figures out where he needs to be in order to meet the next Mars mission in 4 years. On the other side, Mark is studying Mars locations to figure out the location of the next NASA mission, which is in the next 4 years. The location is 32,000 kilometers away from his base. The rover Mark has got is only capable of traveling 35 kilometers before its battery dies. Additionally, Mark calculates the time of 50 days for him to get to the destination. After working the whole day, Mark assembles his way towards the destination, but when the night approaches, Mark utterly feels cold. However, he uses the rover's heater, knowing that this won't make the rover last much longer with its battery. So the next day, Mark digs the radioactive component out. This component was buried under sand for safety measures back from his base. Mark again departs in his rover, having the component in the rover to keep himself under normal temperatures at night. Meanwhile, Vincent is holding another press conference, telling the public about Mark, who is taking his rover on longer trips. He says that they have figured out Mark's goal is to proceed to their new mission location. They've expedited the estimated completion time to 3 to 4 months instead of 4 years. Commanding to the JPL, they are in hopes of getting to Mark before anything bad happens to him. Sanders decides not to tell Mark's crew that he's still alive because they don't want to distract them while they're still trying to make their way home. Sanders decides not to distract Mark's crew, who are on their way home, by telling them about Mark. However, Mark has harvested about 400 potatoes from his garden, planting the smaller ones and taking the larger ones to eat later. Trying to contact NASA, Mark locates the Pathfinder, a rover that was lost on Mars several years ago. The next Martian day, Mark proceeds to go to the rover. And Vincent, when finds Mark's direction towards the Pathfinder, he goes to JPL to see the replica of the rover. Mark digs out the rover and carries it back to the base. By adjusting the rover's faults, he is finally able to make contact with NASA. However, the only thing NASA can do with it is to move the camera around, but Mark sets up a hexadecimal communication system using so that he can ask more than just yes or no questions. The JPL uses the replica to instruct Mark on how to hack into the rover to communicate with NASA through the Pathfinder. Once done, Vincent tells Mark about their plan to rescue him and Mark is relieved. Mark wants to know how his crew reacted when they found out he was still alive, but Vincent has to admit to him that his crew still doesn't know. Mark is furious that NASA has kept his team in the dark, however, NASA decides to tell the crew. Meanwhile, when Mark's crew goes to receive their mail, they get communications from NASA telling them that Mark is still alive and that they plan on trying to save him. Mark does the math, and with all of the food left over on the base in addition to all of the potatoes he has grown, he has just enough food to last until NASA can send another ship to come get him, as long as nothing goes wrong. At night, when Mark is tending to his garden, the entrance chamber explodes, injuring him and leaving his helmet cracked. He quickly seals it with duct tape to replenish his oxygen. Mark goes back to his garden and finds the exposure to Mars' atmosphere killed all of his plants and destroyed the system he had set up for keeping them watered. Frustrated, Mark tells NASA about the accident and they realize that if they don't speed up the timeline for getting to Mark, he won't have enough food to last him until they get there. However, Mark's old crew is granted permission from NASA to contact him and they catch up, heckling each other. The next day, Mark cleans up the area of the base he had reserved for growing his potatoes, taking out all the tarp and dirt, and then reseals the hole to turn on the oxygen. A physicist named Rich is asked about the condition who works on finding a better plan to rescue Mark in less time. NASA decides to skip inspections on the ship they plan to use for a rescue mission, reasoning that the inspection would take up an unnecessary amount of time. Unexpectedly, on launch, the ship explodes, and all of their hard work goes up in flames. When the news crosses the world, China's Space Division watches this newscast about NASA's failed launch and offers their aid. But Rich meets with NASA's director and the team explaining how the Hermes, the ship that Mark's crew is on, will swing back into Earth's orbit long enough to be sent with a fresh supply of food, then shoot back into space to pick up Mark without landing. The only problem with the plan is that it will add 500 days to Hermes' travel time. NASA's director vetoes the plan, explaining that he doesn't want to risk the lives of everyone on board the Hermes to save Mark. Another NASA coordinator thinks this is unfair and sends the plan details to Hermes in secret. Mark's crew discusses the plan amongst themselves, realizing that if they follow through with it, they will be committing mutiny. They discuss whether or not they want to spend another 500 days in space away from their families, but ultimately decide it's the right thing to do. They take a unanimous vote to go back for Mark. NASA is notified that the Hermes has gone off its plotted course and the director scolds Mitch, the other coordinator, for secretly changing the plot and putting risk on the crew. Also, Sanders asks Mitch to resign when the mission is completed. However, for the plan to work, Mark has to figure out how to gather up all the equipment and get them to the ship in time to meet up with the Hermes as they pass Mars, as the plan is to dock Mauve with the Hermes. The Hermes swings by Earth, picks up supplies, provided by the Chinese, and uses the gravitational pull of Earth's atmosphere as momentum to launch them back towards Mars without using as much fuel. 7 months have passed and Mark begins preparing to meet the Hermes. He gathers all of his supplies and packs them into the rover. He takes the solar panels with him so he can recharge the rover occasionally without having to come back to the base. Recording his final video, Mark departs on his next journey. NASA reasons that Mark's ship will have to be going fast to meet up with the Hermes, so they instruct Mark to remove all of the equipment that is now unnecessary. He is suggested to take out all of the supplies meant for a 6-person crew and leave only enough for 1 person. Also to take off the front and sides of the ship and replace them with a tarp to reduce the weight, and to remove all of the control panels since the Hermes will be operating his ship remotely. Mark arrives at the MOV and prepares as planned, ejecting everything to lose weight. As the day arrives, the thrill on Earth about this mission is enthusiastic. Mark shaves off the beard he's grown, puts on new clothes and a space suit, and awaits instruction from his crew. They reassure him and warn him that he might pass out because of the force of the launch. Once Mark's ship takes off, the tarps get sucked into space almost immediately. Mark passes out and is unable to communicate with his crew to let them know. However, as the payload of MOV is set into Mars orbit, Mark wakes up, and his crew informs him that they won't be able to get their ship close enough to Mark's. The commander instructs one of the crew members, who is a chemist, to construct an explosive and rig it to the back of the ship to slow them down so they have a better chance of reaching Mark. They set off the bomb and are in sight of Mark's ship, but not close enough to reach him. The commander puts on a space suit, straps herself into a chair on the outside of the ship, tethers it with a length of rope, and makes her way toward Mark. Unfortunately, the cable isn't long enough, so Mark cuts a hole in his suit and uses the air pressure to guide him to the commander. She catches him, reels him in, and they go back inside to reunite with the rest of the crew. They let NASA know they have Mark and are on their way home. The crew had arrived safely on Earth, and several years later, Mark was teaching NASA initiates about safety and preparedness in space. The Ares 5 launches with the Chinese, and the crew members of the Hermes watch the launch on the television with their loved ones. Here, the movie ends with a fantastic show. I really enjoyed watching this film and I hope you have come to understand the Martian's recap.